even if they can execute a fair and effective mail-in election, no one on the right's going to believe the results.
August 18th, 2020, episode 16, season 2 of your absolute must-view bi-weekly, fortnightly, that is, podcast, The Barney and Clyde Show. On today's episode, we're going to, in our not quite a business, not quite a government agency segment, we're going to look at the US Postal Service, the upcoming hearings on its current predicament, Trump's bluster about its role in the upcoming elections, a bit about the service's history, the role of its union, and its unfunded liabilities. In the I'll decide that for myself, thank you segment, we're going to look at Uber's announcement that it will suspend operations if it's forced to regard its drivers as employees. In the turning down the temperature in a perennial hotbed segment, we're going to look at the question, could the UAE-Israel deal be a harbinger of a new era in the Middle East? And segment 4, I don't need this kind of grief, we're going to look at law enforcement morale in mid-2020 America. So, welcome back to the Libation Station. Well, the virtual Libation Station.
Yes.
In non-pandemic times, we meet in person at the Libation Station, but we've been doing this remotely here a little bit. A lot of things are remote these days, as you all know. But we still bring a beverage, and Clyde says he's got some coffee, so do I. Apropos of one of our segments today, I've got my Bartholomew County Community Corrections. Yeah, which I at the December meeting last year, they gave one to everybody who had perfect attendance, and I said, I'm just a reporter. I'm not on your advisory board or anything. And they said, no, but you were here for every meeting, so I got myself a nice little.
Well, there you go. It's not a parting gift for when they release you from custody.
Yeah, no, but I enjoy
it. Should
reporting,
be,
except that they're at 8 a.m, which is not. But
that's brutally early for a guy like Barney who works in his PJs.
Exactly. All right. Well, I think we can probably just go ahead and get into this whole thing, can't we?
Yeah, let's dive into the post office.
Yeah, Postmaster General. The immediate reason for our discussing this is Postmaster General DeJoy is going to testify before the Senate Homeland Security Committee on Friday. And they've asked him to come in because the post office is beset with problems. The thing is, most of its problems are of long standing. There are people who are trying to make hay about that and tie them into certain. Donald Trump, for instance, is strongly hinting that they just don't have the resources or the chops to properly accommodate mail-in voting. But it all goes much deeper than that. The basic problem is it's in a vague area. Is it a private business, or is it a government service, or is it somewhere in between? And how do you see this thing, Clyde?
How do I see the post office in general, or how do I see their ability to handle mail-in voting? Because I think those are two separate questions.
Okay.
Both of which I think we want to address today.
Yeah, let's start with your view on the post office in general.
Okay. Well, I put a post out on Facebook today just to kind of get people's pulse on where they stood with the thing, and I was really shocked that people really love the post office. They really came to its defense, and I was just shocked. I mean, I can't imagine anyone's ever gone to the post office and had just a really pleasant experience. The only talk I've ever heard of the post office from my birth until today was bitching and moaning about how terrible it is. And I think that was something that transcended all politics. That's one thing that we could all unify behind, is how terrible the customer service is at the post office, how long the lines are, and what a garbage run facility it really is. But because Donald Trump is out attacking it, now it's the new hero du jour. So it really was quite surprising for me. So I think that a lot of the people who defend its history, and I almost will too. I think it should be a private organization or disbanded altogether. I don't think it's one of those things that you rip the Band-Aid off and you just turn the lights off tomorrow. I think it's one of those things you phase out over time because it's outlived its usefulness. There are, there was, correct me if I'm wrong, but its history is that it started because in the frontier, it was hard to get communications back and forth from the outlying frontier of a young America, and it wasn't profitable for private industry to go in there and provide that service, but yet that was needed. So they had to make the post roads and they had to make the post service get out to these more rural areas that couldn't be served. And the reason was they needed to get information back and forth. Well, that's all well and good, but we don't have a problem getting information back and forth across the world in seconds anymore. So I think that argument is outlived its usefulness. I do think that there are people who argue about rural areas being underserved, and I think there's an argument to be made there, but it's really a bigger case of to whether or not we should provide universal broadband or subsidized broadband in some way to get information back and forth from rural areas. That people would be much better off than that, or with that, than they would by getting paper letters. And like we talked about before, 90% of the mail that you get, you didn't ask for, you didn't want, and comes at a great carbon footprint and fills up the landfills.
Yeah, it's junk mail. It's not letters from your dear beloved grandmother or something like that. And the thing is, okay, the footing on which it is put changed drastically in 1970. There'd been a strike, and we'll talk more about the role of organized labor in the Postal Service here in a little bit. But following a strike in 1970, there was 8 days of disrupted service, and Richard Nixon, who was president at the time, changed the Postal Service from a cabinet department to an independent government agency. The idea was that it would run more like a corporation, but Congress would continue to regulate the rules by which it operated and the fees it could set, and how much it could charge for a stamp. And
yeah, isn't that just the most precious and beautiful irony of the government constantly regulating private industry, and now it's sort of getting a taste of its own medicine. You know what I mean? This government entity being basically forced into being insolvent by government regulations. It's hilarious.
Yeah. Then there's as I alluded to just a moment ago, there's also the matter of the postal union. A very small percentage of the overall American workforce is unionized anymore, and it seems like public sector, or in the case of the postal union or postal service, public sector entities are where you still find a lot of unionization, and the Postal Service is required to fund its pension program way out, years in advance, and the arrangement requires the U.S. Postal Service to assume that every single current worker there is going to work their entire career at that post office, and nobody else makes that assumption. No other entity, whether they have a union or not. Where the money and the Postal Service hasn't actually paid a penny into its pre-funded liabilities since 2012.
Oh my gosh.
The money comes from, are you ready, boys and girls? Social Security. We're all paying for it. Yeah, which kind of reinforces its identity as a government agency.
So really, they're stealing from the old people, the people who have saved all their lives.
Yeah.
Now they're going to steal that money so that people can get letters from the local car lot. Give me a break.
Yeah. Right. This week's specials at your local Chinese buffet or that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, or letters from insurance agents, solicitations from insurance agents disguised as birthday cards and crap like that.
Right.
But again, it should be. I don't understand why all the left aren't out immediately demanding for the closure of the post office with this again with a huge carbon footprint. They're filling up the landfills. The customer service is terrible.
Yeah, there's an argument, a tree hugger argument.
And they're taking
Yeah.
from the public and enriching somebody else.
Mhm.
That to me should be the leftist argument for closing the post office tomorrow.
Yeah. And then there is, of course, another factor, which is the very stable genius, our current president, and he sees this as a beautiful opportunity. Beautiful. That's a VSG-esque word if you ever heard one. But that casting doubt on the post office's ability to deal with higher volume of mail if there's going to be mail-in voting. Okay, a few things. There are two main arguments about dealing with the pandemic. One, that we ought to be so darn cautious that any opening up of our society and economy is very gradual. The other is throw the whole thing open right away. Why don't we let everybody just go back to how we were doing things in February? I think somewhere in between there is how we're going to muddle through this thing, and that's certainly true with this election, especially since there are spikes and wanings of the virus spread in various parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people would probably want to go vote in person. I'm a traditionalist. I believe in voting on election day. It's just kind of the way I approach everything. I'm kind of a traditionalist by nature, and I like to go on election day, and I like to stand in line and howdy the politicians who are giving me one last plug for their election, and see some friends and all that stuff. It's a national day of coming together to decide our future as a country and all that. But there are a lot of people that are going to want to do mail-in voting. The funding needed to make sure that the U.S. Post Office has the resources it needs to pull this off, to handle mail-in voting, a higher influx of, or a higher volume of work to process, is part of an overall new COVID aid package. Democrats want to play games with that, and so does President Trump. And it could be done. It goes against our shared principles that fall within our Venn diagram overlap. You as the libertarian and me as the conservative. I too would like to. I think the post office, with all due respect to Ben Franklin, it has pretty well been rendered obsolete by the advance of technology.
Right.
But if we were going to do this, we could pump the resources into it to see that mail-in voting goes, for those who want to do it, goes smoothly come November. But Democrats want to say yes to that because there's so many other goodies in their version of the aid overall.
There you go. And is there no pork in the Republican version of it?
Well, I'm not sure about what's going through the House in a Republican version.
Okay.
Or Congress, but but the VSG is saying I just don't think we're going to get a deal done in time, and then they won't be able to do it, and thereby casting doubt. So the whole thing's going to be chaos and ripe for corruption, and we may not truly know who won the election because it'll be so chaotic.
Well, you won't know. I mean, don't you think that in some way that both sides are sort of trying to rig it in their favor, or at least set conditions in their favor? I kind of get both standpoints. From the Democrats' side, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to stay home, so you should give them an option to mail in their ballots or vote a different way. And I also see the Republican view that this is a huge upsetting of the apple cart. We've never done it this way. It's a major change, and any major change is bound to, present a different playing field. So, we're not playing under either circumstance. We're not playing on the same terms that we played 4 years ago.
Yeah, they're each side's using the Postal Service and its set of problems as a vehicle to grandstand and jockey for political advantage.
I think you personally have to let go of the idea of mail-in voting as something that will work. It at this point it cannot work.
Okay.
Because there's going to be this huge influx of mail capacity. The Postmaster General already said they're making no changes. So they're going to have this huge overcapacity that they're going to have to deal with. Now, could they deal with that effectively? Maybe. Maybe there's a good chance that they could. But are mistakes going to be made? Certainly some mistakes are going to be made. Are those mistakes going to be big enough to affect the election? I doubt it, but maybe. But what's the perception going to be if there are any mistakes made on both sides? Well, somebody tried to rig it. And with the post office or Postal Service union endorsing Biden's candidacy, who do you think is going to scream the loudest saying, well, that if any mistakes are made, it's unfair? You know what I mean? There's no way that they can, even if they can execute a fair and effective mail-in election, no one on the right's going to believe the results.
Oh yeah, the Trumpists are going to be all over this endorsement. That's one factor, and another factor I think we ought to make sure is DeJoy himself. He replaced not Brent. What's the lady's name that the former postmaster?
I don't remember her name.
She left in January and was replaced by DeJoy, who is a longtime Republican donor and especially a big donor to Victory for Trump Fund. And he also used to run a logistics company that was a big USPS contractor, which now he knows the business, and he has run a truly private sector company that's in the logistics business, so that you can cast that in a favorable light, but it also adds to an appearance of fishiness that the Democrats will certainly exploit. So the point we made a few minutes ago, this thing's just ripe for spinning by both sides.
And I think if you really want to have it even be remotely viewed as being fair, you have to have two independent auditing agencies, from one that's approved by the Democrats and one that's approved by the Republicans, and they both have to have full audit capacity and access to make sure that the thing's gone on the up and up in outside of and in addition to the Election Commission, or whatever controls that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Clyde, and we'd have to have both. Have to have two auditing agencies. But it's going to be interesting to see how DeJoy's testimony at that Senate committee hearing goes. This will be our chance to hear from him, and go ahead.
This might be a good segue to our next topic, but they could actually maybe you could vote via Uber. Uber's already carrying lots of mail.
Yes, and so I think that's a very nice segue. Uber, of course, is the premier and pioneer ride-sharing service, and Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi said in an interview with MSNBC the other day that if California doesn't, if a court doesn't overturn a recent ruling in California requiring Uber to classify its drivers as full-time employees, we'll shut down, we'll suspend operations. And I've got a personal angle on this because I drove Uber for some time, and I did it precisely because I I'm a free spirit kind of person. I like to set my own hours whenever possible. Most everything I do in life is on a freelance basis. Ostensibly, I'm an employee of Indiana University, but they let me teach my courses pretty much the way I want to. But Uber, the whole model just greatly appealed to me. Set your own hours and
set your own routes. Go where you want.
Exactly. You bet. Yeah.
Again, I don't understand why the left gets down on these things. It's like exactly what they said they wanted. This empowers people.
Yes. Well, there's a left-leaning guy who he doesn't so much anymore, but he used to pester me all the time in the comment threads on my blog late in the day, which, by the way, hope you're reading late in the day on a regular basis.
Better be.
But yeah. He'd say, "Oh, the greedy owners of the Uber aren't paying you bennies, and you file a 1099 instead of a W-2 at the end of the year." And precisely what I want. I'll take care of my own health insurance and my own retirement. I'll establish that on my own. That's exactly the way I want things.
Right.
And
the whole point of Uber was to be a ride-sharing program. Right,
yeah.
not a taxi service per se.
Right,
but people innovated that. They figured it out.
Yeah,
that they could actually make money doing it.
Speaking of unions, which we were in the previous segment, early in Uber's history, there were some. I remember one incident at the Paris airport in France where unionized taxi drivers were smashing Uber cars at the airport with hammers, hammers and so forth.
But no one has a problem with the taxi drivers and the taxi unions who are acting out in literally a violent manner. The left wants to protect those people, and the Uber drivers who just want to make some money in between other gigs.
You're right. That's the way
they have to be shut down, and that's what California really needs right now: is fewer jobs and less flexibility, and less ability for people to get back and forth to work. And that's really one of the places where Uber shines, is getting people back and forth to work quickly and cheaply.
You bet.
Way cheaper than a taxi cab. My God.
Those medallions that are how you get in the taxi business in big cities. They won't let out any more medallions into the system, for one thing, and so that they're at a premium. The cost of obtaining a medallion is through the roof. You pay dearly, and you hang on to it like it's an extremity of your body or something.
This mafia tactics.
Yeah,
it's extortion, and Uber punched a hole in that in the mafia cabal that is the partnership between government and the taxi companies, and everybody benefited from it except that segment, but they have the power. They have the power of the government gun behind them.
California is just so off the charts. California's attorney general and 3 city attorneys are the ones who brought the lawsuit against the companies under a new state law, Assembly Bill 5, that aims to provide benefits to gig workers, core to a business's operation. Like I say, California in general is just off the charts. Have you heard about this new wealth tax that a guy named Rob Bonta in the state assembly is wants to impose on billionaires, and such that it wouldn't even do you any good to leave the state if you were a billionaire and wanted to hang on to your money. This law would allow California to continue to tax your wealth for 10 years after you'd moved somewhere else.
I don't think they can do that. Can they even do that? Is that constitutional?
I think this is going to lead to lawsuits. For one thing, I mean, it's still it hasn't really come up for debate in the state assembly, in the state legislature out there, but
because it's freaking ridiculous.
Yeah, but so is this. The name of this segment is "I'll decide that for myself." Thank you. If I wanted to be a taxi driver or work for some airport shuttle service, I'd do that and get the bennies and all that good stuff. I became an Uber driver, particularly because of that business model. It allowed me to be a freelancer.
I this is sometimes it's one of those cases where sometimes it starts to soak into my head that like, well, God, well, maybe we do need some kind of universal benefit system, or healthcare or retirement and that kind of stuff, just for the simple fact that like the fact that the government can regulate any business in any way, that already gives the universality of it. They've already forced employers to provide certain levels of benefits and all that kind of stuff. Well, maybe we should just blow the doors off the thing and provide a universal benefit. And I feel like if I were industry, and if I had a promise of a certain level of taxation and a certain level of intrusiveness versus non-intrusiveness, that I could count on being the case, and we could just pay the tax and get them the hell out of the industry, I'd probably do it.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like the libertarian in you, though, Clyde.
Well, it's sort of the Milton Friedman practicality coming out. It's like it's if you have a choice between two terrible situations, well, which terrible situation is the path of least resistance? Like, how do we work this thing out? Like Friedman had people always bringing up the universal basic income thing, saying that Friedman had promoted a universal basic income, which is total malarkey. He did not. He promoted the idea of a transfer payment of money. It's just a cash payment to people in lieu of all social services, in lieu of all welfare. No medical care, no food stamps, no WIC, no housing assistance, just money. You don't have money, you get money, and that's all you get. And then we forget about it. And if you don't do well on the money you get, then you don't get it. And rich people wouldn't get the payment. If you above a certain income, you wouldn't get the payment.
Yeah, give them cash and let's see what they do with it.
If they would actually stick to that model and say, here's your cash payment, there's no more welfare. But in a few years, because Congress, they still have the power to create new laws and new services and new programs, in 2 more years, you'd have not only a universal basic income, but you'd also have welfare back. And then you'd have housing assistance back. Well, people can't live on their universal basic income. That'd be the next argument. Same thing here, with the benefits situation. If I thought that it would benefit industry and they could just forget about all this benefits garbage and wouldn't be regulated, and they were laissez-faire, except they had to pay this tax, I think that'd be great. Except, well, not great, it would be better than what we have now, except that it wouldn't stay that way. It'd stay that way for like 6 months, and then they'd be like, well, these billionaires are still making money, we got to do something about that.
Yeah, well, and even more basically, Clyde, it would reinforce the notion that healthcare can somehow be a right, and that secure sunset years is somehow a right. And we've talked before, a right. By definition, those things can't be rights. A right does not require some kind of effort from your fellow human being.
Right.
And I'm looking at the thing from a very basic philosophical level, that it would reinforce this notion that certain things are rights that by definition can't be.
Yeah. And I have a right to peacefully assemble. So if that means I want to take an Uber car somewhere, then by God, that's what I'll do. I'll decide that for myself. Thank you.
Yes. Uber's an interesting company. I mean, on one level, it, like so many major American corporations these days, it leans left. It's all into social justice these days, and saving the planet and all that kind of stuff. But the basic model is something I think I greatly applaud. Uber and Lyft said that they would appeal during the 10-day period before it goes into effect. And so I really wish them luck. I hope that goes well for them.
Well, and the problem is that it sets a precedent, though. I mean, Uber and Lyft, they're not the only providers like this that provide us that basically create a platform for independent people to connect with customers. Mm-hmm. There's Thumbtack and other types of service sharing. There's Fiverr and freelancer.com and all this kind of stuff.
Airbnb.
Airbnb. And so, I mean, is everyone going to have to get paid as an employee? Are they going to have like full-time targets to hit? Are they going to have to, pay benefits and all that kind of stuff? It's freaking stupid. Just leave them alone. And if people like the service, they'll use it. And I'm not going to try to defend them. I'm not going to say that Uber's a nice company or the people that run it aren't shady. I don't know, but it seems like the people who are participating in it are willing to do so. And if they weren't willing to do so, then I'd have a problem with it.
Yeah. So I'm that's one for us all to pay attention to, see how things go for this appeal of the lawsuit. Okay.
All right.
How we doing?
We got to move on. Time's up.
Okay. Segment 3, turning down the temperature in a perennial hotbed. This was pretty major.
Right.
Only 3 times in Israel's modern history, going back to 1947, has it reached peace deals with Arab neighbors. Israel in 1979, Jordan in 1994, and now the United Arab Emirates in here just last week. And it's great. They're going to have set up telephone service between them, direct flights between Dubai and Tel Aviv. All kinds of interesting things are happening. They're going to have diplomatic relations. Yeah.
It's really fascinating stuff. And I think the UAE has always been, maybe not always, but for as long as I can really remember, they've always sort of been viewed as the sane kid on the block, the on the level, trying to work towards peace nation in the region. I'm not sure that the other nations were really fairly judged when it came to that, but the UAE has always seemed to be pretty willing to work with the West.
Yeah.
And it seems like they've wanted this partnership for a while, and this sort of gave them an excuse to go ahead and solidify it.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's been de facto already happening, at least to a large degree, for some time. This merely formalized it. Israel, of course, is a tech startup magnet. It's the most technologically advanced country in the Middle East, and one of the most advanced in the world. And the UAE stands to benefit from that.
And I think they are as well. The UAE is very, very modern country, I believe, right? So they're probably very similar in that regard.
Yeah, I've got a buddy who was in Dubai last year, and he said that skyscrapers the size of the World Trade Center are just everywhere.
That's what I've heard. I've heard it looks like the future. I heard it's just like, it looks like sci-fi.
The police drive Lamborghinis in Dubai, this guy said.
Yeah. They probably don't have a wealth tax.
Yeah. There you go. A few things about this. The 2 entities in the Middle East that are not pleased with this are Iran, because this points up the Shiite arc that Iran wants to build across the Middle East from its own country to the Mediterranean, and then the Sunni radical groups like and particularly Palestinian like Hamas and Hezbollah. Particularly the Palestinians, I'd like to talk about for a moment. They really have been relegated to a side issue. They're no longer the main thing that people are talking about, and that's why I called this segment what I did. I think this might be a harbinger of a new era characterized by new dynamics, because the Palestinians can no longer exercise veto power on relations between Israel and Arab states. These countries have share Israel's security interests and have that's more important to them than being buddies with the Palestinians.
That's fascinating.
And yeah, for decades the Palestinians have rejected American ideas about how to do it. There were rather exhaustive talks at the White House during the Clinton era about how to set up a 2-state solution and all this stuff, and There's kind of a quasi-famous scene of Yasser Arafat in a huff leaving one of the negotiating meetings about that, and Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State at the time, running after him in her high heels down the hall. Mr. Chairman, we've got a new idea on the table. Come back to the meeting, and you don't have to do that anymore.
Well, I haven't really heard any Palestinian leadership speak on this, come to think of it.
I have, and I didn't. I'm remiss in not having it available for us right here and to share. But yeah, Hamas leaders in particular have spoken out against it and said that, on that very thing, it leaves us out of the proceedings. Well, the UAE was interested in achieving peace and getting something going commerce-wise. You don't seem to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it works out in their benefit, it seems, whereas at least Israel doesn't expand further, if I understand the deal correctly.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take any Palestinian grievances off the table, but it does ensure that the lines don't get pushed further, at least if they want to be, if they want to keep this contract sound.
Yeah.
Which they may not. They may violate it. Who knows?
Yeah. Now, once again, the very stable genius figures into this. He's tried to hog the spotlight and crow about how this is a major achievement for him. It's mainly between the UAE and Israel. Granted, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, had convened a task force to look in how to achieve an overarching Middle East peace, but all it did was mainly piss off the Palestinians without doing anything positive anywhere else. And so this is mainly two Middle East players. And this another interesting thing is it's the first time Israel has signed a peace agreement with an Arab neighbor that was not geographically contiguous. Both Israel and Jordan border Israel.
Right.
The UAE is a couple countries over.
Right.
And,
yeah, that is interesting. I mean, you have the shared border interest, right? But when you don't have that, it makes the terms a lot more transparent, I think.
Yeah, and it gets to a basic question that the Palestinians are really going to need to come up with an answer to. Why not go for peace, real peace with Israel?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's time. I personally not a huge fan of, states forming and dissolving and then leaving people and their private property in the dust, which is certainly what happened to the Palestinians. I think that they have a lot of legitimate grievances, but, the
UN offered them their own country when Israel was set up in the late 40s.
Yeah, I know that the two-state solution's been proposed several times, and there never was a country called Palestine, and the I won't say ownership, but the occupation of this land certainly hadn't been in the hands of those people in some time. But you did have individual people who owned private property within this place who were displaced, right? And that's the main argument. And if you propose a solution where it's like, okay, yeah, you can have this, strip of crappy land over here, I'm just gonna be like, I kind of want my freaking house back, dude. You know?
My great grandfather farmed it.
But now it's more like my great grandfather's farm, and we have to storm forward at some point. And I think that the Israelis have been genuine and disingenuous both in some dealings, and I don't know. We'll just see how they hold to this contract. I think that the Palestinians should definitely work towards a two-state solution if they want a state at all. But we're going to go down a rabbit hole because there's all kinds of nuance to the, what the rights of a Palestinian are in Israel, and some people will claim that it's it's the only country in the Middle East where the religious minority can have full rights to vote and all that kind of stuff, and that's probably true. But at the same time, they also did say, well, in order for us to have a Jewish majority and a Jewish rule, then we have to have, even if these people have the right to vote, they have to be a minority. So we got to get 80% of Palestinians out of the country, which is what they did.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of nuance to it, and there's not really a lot of goodwill in the history on both sides. So,
Yeah. I'd like to get back to American politics for just a moment.
please.
There's a little concern that should Joe Biden and his team win the presidential election, you'll remember that Joe Biden was vice president under Barack Obama, whose administration signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran to end Iran's nuclear program, and in a very, very narrow, highly technical sense, it retarded that program, but it sure didn't change anything about Iran's attitude toward the West or the U.S. and Israel specifically, and they've continued to go on building missiles and harassing other countries' ships at sea and all kinds of and sponsoring terrorism. My point being, a Biden administration would probably go to work right away on reviving the JCPOA, and that would throw a wrench into this new agreement, because part of the motivation for the agreement was that we have this common interest in holding back Iranian aims in our region. That would throw a wrench in this newly established atmosphere of comity and excitement about getting some trade going and things like that.
Yeah. And I think we've talked about the JCPOA before, and that was sort of one of our outside of the Venn diagram overlap areas.
Yeah, you kind of like it, don't you?
I thought it was a step in the right direction for peace. It's just sort of like the Israel-Palestine issue. At some point, we have to move forward. My dog is white. Hey, come here. Come here, baby. Come here. Come on. All right.
Look at you. I'm trying to remember her name.
Topa.
Okay.
She needs a little attention. But it was a step in the right direction. Like with the Palestinian situation, they're gonna have to move forward at some point. They just have to. Somebody's gonna have to, give up something and move forward. And that's sort of the same thing that did, was it gave their money that was frozen back to them. Not in the best way imaginable, but it was a sign of goodwill and good intentions from our side. And sometimes you have to extend an olive branch like that. But I don't think that going back and forth is the way to go either. They're going to have to, say, here's where we stand, and we stand here, and that's it.
Yeah. This is going to be another interesting one to watch. If either things go the other way politically here in America, or things happen quickly, I could see a lot more of these agreements being signed.
Absolutely.
And which, for everyone that does, it further entrenches the idea that a new era is underway in the Middle East, where Israel's not viewed as this pariah or little Satan or whatever.
Yeah. That would be nice.
Yeah. Well, how we doing?
That's
time-wise?
it. We gotta go. One more.
Oh, okay. Yes, just real quickly, and this one starts out on a local or at least a regional level. Clyde and I do this from central Indiana, and in our capital city, Indianapolis, the IMPD is bracing for fallout after a grand jury indicted 2 officers for excessive force. On May 31st, 2 officers were among those arresting Rachel Harding and Ivor Westfield, who suffered major injuries seen in photos. They were they face Marion County Prosecutor Ryan Mears announced grand jury indictments against the 2 officers for felony battery and official misconduct. But now 100 emergency or event response group officers who are highly trained to deal with the kinds of situations we've seen in the civil unrest this summer. 100 ERG trained officers are now planning to turn in their gear. This is a tough one. I don't know, maybe this kind of at least bumps up against the edge of our Venn diagram overlap, because I know you're kind of wary of police presence in our society generally, and I guess I am too. I think everything since George Floyd's death has really spurred this country to be thinking about police practices and so forth. But the fact is that with all these calls to defund the police and the way they've been treated in riots and had their police precinct buildings torched and taken over and all that kind of thing, morale's down. That's even true here on the local level. I cover local government for a local media company, and so I attend quarterly police review board meetings. And at the last one, our new incoming police chief was asked by one of the advisory board members, "How's morale down at your department these days?" And he said, "I'll be candid, it's kind of low. In places like Atlanta and Minneapolis, you're not response to emergency calls are not timely anymore. In some cases, certain kinds of crimes that you call in to say, there's a crime underway at my home or where I am, are not even getting responded to at all. And because some nights they just don't have the staff to fully staff a shift. And
well, once again, these things are really nuanced, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I can kind of see where the reasonable arguments on the left say we should be defunding some of these outfits. I don't really see the need for there to be a militarized police presence in a neighborhood. I think maybe taking the tanks away from the police might be a good idea, because if we need the tanks, then maybe that's not the police responsibility. They certainly don't get paid enough to have a burdensome responsibility that would require a freaking tank in the street. So taking some of those crisis situations, things that should be more crisis counseling and negotiation. What do they call that? Crisis negotiating, things like that. And like I don't think you should just take away law enforcement. You might want to shift some responsibilities away from the police so that they have a less burdensome job.
Well, I've heard police say that. In recent years, we have been asked to be domestic dispute arbitrators and child custody counselors and all kinds of stuff that does not really have to do with our core function.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things I think that I have a problem with is that I sort of look at the left and the right, and I can't believe that the left is hypocritical, and I can't believe that the right is hypocritical on issues, and I amalgamize these things into being like a single mind. But like, there's so many different people on both sides, Like, there are reasonable people on the left saying we need to, chop up these responsibilities, defund or whatever, the police and change the way law enforcement is done. And that's a reasonable argument. And then there's people saying, no, you have to disband the police altogether. You have to disband ICE altogether. And that's unreasonable, And then there's people on the right who are like, no, you got to double down and get the tanks and roll them in there and kick everybody's ass and get these bootlickers on the ground and put them back in line. You know what I mean? And that's unreasonable. But there's people on the right too that are like, look, cops, there are some of them who are bad, but a lot of them are very good. Probably most of them are very good, and they put their lives on the line for not a lot of money, and we really owe them a debt of gratitude. And I personally don't want to insult them this way, and that's reasonable.
Yeah.
Right. So how do we find the common ground between those? And one of the things I would like to see is that all the data on police brutality and police interventions, it's out there. Okay, go look for it. And it's fragmented, but it's out there. One thing I want to know, and I haven't been able to find, is, they'll say in a incident with the police, a white person is X likely to die, and a black person is Y likely to die, right? Mm-hmm. But how likely is it that the police officer is going to die, right? Like in sheer numbers of encounters with the police, how likely is it that the officer is going to die? Just in percentages of stops. I kind of got the feeling that the people who are most likely to get hurt is probably the cop. and I can't find that information. And every time I Google any key phrase I can think of to try to get that number, all I get are police brutality statistics and race crap, you know?
Yeah, I can't believe that that kind of hard data is so hard to find. Because there have been people, some people we've mentioned on this podcast before, such as Heather McDonald and Larry Elder, who have written a lot about police conduct and police relations with the public and various segments within the public and that kind of thing. But
yeah, and I've heard Larry Elder make the claim that the police officer, in relation to, number of stops, is statistically more likely to be the one harmed. But I haven't seen the data that backs that up, and I looked for it myself and I couldn't find it. It's probably on their page somewhere.
There are undeniably some reforms that need to be undertaken, once again, speaking of unions, there are police associations and that kind of thing that distribute literature and have training sessions all the time. I mean, it's just like quality assurance and continuous improvement in any field. The police think about these things, for heaven's sake.
Right.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, it looks like like we were talking about before, that the police departments and specific organizations favor a lot of these changes, but the conversation has shifted in the media these days to being a defund and disband narrative, and that calling the police is a it comes from white privilege, that you feel safe calling the police, that the police will make things worse when they get there, which is counterfactual. But that's the narrative. So how do you expect morale within the police departments to remain high when you're constantly insulting them and you're constantly expecting them to do these things that put their bodies and their lives at risk for very little money? And I'm not trying to disparage any of the police brutality incidents that have happened, or against anybody of any race, but there's a problem there. We've got to address that problem. But I don't think that addressing that problem is that you take away police services from people who need the protection. And even if you haven't gotten to defund yet, even if you haven't gotten to removing police personnel, the talk of that dismantles the morale, and that reduces the amount of police presence in places where it's needed.
Yeah, it didn't get a lot of coverage, but last week there was a riot in Washington, D.C., in which 41 people were arrested, and a couple of interesting incidents came out of that. There was a black man who got in an argument with some of the protesters, if you will, and he was defending the police, and he said, "They protect us," and the protester said, "They gotta go." The man said, "People kill people," and the protester replied, "I understand that, but we've got to take care of this first, and then we can handle that."
Good luck doing that.
Right. The other one is a black woman. She raised her voice in frustration because she was unable to get to her husband since she was in the area where police were arresting people. She said defending the police was a bad idea, adding that the protesters were doing more harm than good. So contrary to the narrative, not everyone of a certain pigmentation is on board with the idea that police need to be phased out.
Yeah, and I think that you get a glance there at the mindset of the left in our society. They are. This is why I can't be a part of them anymore. I was on the left, but I can't remain in that mindset where I can't abide them just being everything that they claim to loathe. And if they hate racism and they hate bigotry and they hate prejudice so much, why do they exhibit so much of it? Why do they continue to judge people based on the color of their skin? Why do we want to force people into groups, and not value the individual? I'll never understand it.
We are so far away from that famous phrase from MLK's August 1963 speech about the judging by the content of character and not the color of skin.
Yeah, but you can't bring up Martin Luther King because that's racist now.
Yeah. Grouping people into demographic classifications robs each of us, I was going to say all, but I'd rather use the term each of us, of a very important part of our humanity. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't need to be black or white or male or heterosexual or American or Hoosier or anything else to have certain viewpoints. I can come by them just through the workings of my own mind.
Yep. Yep. And I was having a conversation on social media against my better judgment with somebody not too long ago, and they're giving me a hard time because, we're talking about the voter ID thing. And of course, just like clockwork, the talking point, the bullet point is brought up that, well, people of color don't have access to getting IDs. And it was like, well, substantiate that, I don't understand. I've never heard anybody articulate why that's the case or that's true. I've only heard it articulated the other way around. And it sounds like you're saying that black people are too stupid to get an ID,
Yeah.
or too poor or too something.
Yeah,
But
it's almost got a hint of pity to it.
it's got a huge air of condescension to it. And he said, you really need to step back and examine why you feel this way. And I was like, well, but I don't think black people are weak, and I don't think they're stupid. So who's the racist?
Right.
You obviously think that this person's because of the color of their skin, they're too stupid, or they're too poor, or they're too maligned, or something to access a basic service. And I'd like to see somebody survey people in black neighborhoods and in predominantly black neighborhoods of concentrated poverty, especially, and just see if people think it's hard to get an ID.
Yeah,
I
and
just
we
like to
all
see
know
that.
it's something of a cliche at this point, but it's true that you got to have one when you go to the liquor store. You got to have one when you go onto the convention floor at a PNC convention.
And I'm not even making the claim that you need to show ID to vote. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, but I'm not making that claim. I'm just making the claim that black people are smart enough to get their own freaking ID,
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I think you should, like we talked about last time, I think you should vote via a web portal through blockchain, like
Yeah.
you shouldn't need an ID. You should just...
If this is an elegant technological solution, Claude, why isn't it happening?
Because the government's in charge of it. The
Okay.
government's in charge of implementing elections, right? I mean,
Why don't they see this and implement it?
well, I think it's because you're steering the Titanic.
Okay.
Look at money. I mean, money's the same way. Like they're just now starting to tiptoe into the idea of creating a sort of a Bitcoin knockoff as a federal currency. They're just now starting to explore that. I mean, the technology's a decade old, and they're just now starting to look into that. I mean, that's pathetic.
Okay.
So voting, and this is the time to do it because now we have an emergency.
Yeah.
But again, I don't think it's as big an emergency as people think it is. You might have to go vote. You might have to stand 6 feet apart. You might have to wear a mask.
You have to do that at Kroger.
Yeah, go do it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, we probably better wrap it up there.
Okay. Yeah, our viewers are busy folks, and we want to respect their time. But we also want to thank them for joining us once again. We do this fortnightly and forthrightly, and we pick four segments for matters that are on the nation's plate each time. And we love our growing viewership, and we love it when you engage with us, and let's create a sense of community here. And so you can chime in on the comment threads under our YouTube page, our Facebook page. You can email us. There's a number of ways you can chime in.
Absolutely. The best thing you can do is subscribe. Subscribe to the channel on YouTube. subscribe to our audio podcast feed through Spotify, through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Downcast, whatever you use to get your podcasts. We're probably on that, and if we're not, let us know, and we'll get on there. We're looking at in maybe season 3. We kind of floated this around of doing live streams instead of pre-recorded chats. That's going to take some logistics for us to figure out, but it'd be very cool to have people be able to chime in real time, post your comments. You could text us, send likes and hearts and all that garbage, or maybe even call in and things like that. But we'll figure that out, but just know it's coming. But for right now, the best thing you can do is subscribe and rate us on iTunes. Give us as many stars as you think we deserve, and we need a lot of people to do that, because they don't even, like, if one person gives us a review, even if it's 1 star, 3 stars, 5 stars, whatever, that's not even a blip on iTunes. They don't even register that we got any stars. So we need like 100 people to go and rate us, whatever you think we should be rated, and then we'll start to show up as having been rated at all. And then we become a real boy.
Yeah. Okay. And in the and also, if you're jonesing for some opinion of this sort between now and the next fortnightly convening of the BNC show, you can go to Late in the Day, my blog, or Precipice, my Substack page.
And if you have a problem with something we said, or you have a compliment to hand us, send us a private message on Facebook, and we can record a quick video clip. You can send us hate mail, you can send us rave mail, whatever you want to, but contact us, and we'll make sure it gets in the show.
All right.
Okay.
And until then, stay vigilant about your freedom.
Well, that's an interesting development.